This is Viva Fry.
I'm Dr. Peter McCullough.
This is Tom Luongo.
This is Chuck Prodnick.
This is Alex Kreiner.
Hey, this is Brad Wall.
This is JP Sears.
Hi, this is Frank Peretti.
This is Tammy Peterson.
This is Danielle Smith.
This is James Lindsay.
Hey, this is Brett Kissel, and you're listening to the Shaun Newman Podcast.
Welcome to the podcast, folks. Make sure to stay around here in a couple seconds. Oh, we got some new stuff coming down the pipe before we get there. Did you know you can hold physical gold and silver in your registered accounts? Yes, I'm talking your RRSP, TFSA, RIF, or Kids RESP. How many parents are listening to this as their kids are sleeping in or running around? Yeah, everybody's got the week off. Some people are on trips. Others are just hiding out at home. We're hiding out at home. Either way, this year's RRSP, man, I am excited for the deadline to pass. You shouldn't be. March 3rd. Make sure you get your contributions in. I'm tired of saying RRSP. Yeah, that's about as simple as it is. Once you make the contribution, you can flip it over to physical precious metal at any time. You're probably going, I don't know what the heck this means. That's all right. Text or email Grahame for details or with any questions you have around investing in precious metals and for future silver deals exclusively for you, the SMP listener. Whether it's buying, selling, storing precious metals, make sure to Silver Gold Bull. You toss them a note. You stop in. You say hello. You go online, you buy any purchases, just reference on the SGB, you reference the SMP. Bow Valley Credit Union is your Alberta-regulated, fully serviced financial institution. Alberta residents can take advantage of low or no-cost bank accounts, personal and business mortgages, loans, credit cards, and investing with 100% deposit guarantees. That's compared to big banks that only guarantee $100K. So that's pretty cool. They're also got gold and silver in reserve. They say don't leave your hard-earned savings in trust with Ottawa's standard of inflation and devaluation of currency and taxation. Just give Leanna at welcome@bowvalleycu.com an email to get your membership started today or an emails account today. Here's some new stuff. All right, Prophet River, listen up, folks. Listen up. There's a way to not only support me, but get in on a $100 gift card each month. Okay, here it is. So, with Prophet River, Joel is going to be, man, we got all these cool people going to be a part of the audience experience here. Joel's the primary contact for you, the listener. He is their phone and internet sales manager, and he is quite sharp. I feel like every guy I get dealt with on this side of things is quite sharp, you know? Everybody's talking about Grahame. Everybody's talking about Leanna. Yeah, right? Now we got Joel. Okay, he's added into the team. You're gonna bypass all the I don't know, not inexperienced. I'm sure Prophet River has a bunch of great human beings working there, but you're gonna bypass them all. You're gonna get to Joel. He's gonna take care of you. snp@prophetriver.com. You're probably like, how do I spell that? What do I do? Go down in the show notes. Nice and easy. Any purchases you make, whether you're online, you're in store, you're over the phone, make sure you tell them, hey, reference SNP. That's going to get your name in for a $100 gift card each month, and every time you do it. So if you go in one day and you buy some bullets, and then the next day you go in and you buy a knife, and the next day you go in and buy a gun, that means you're going to get multiple entries in for the $100 gift card at the store. That's every month. All you got to do is reference SNP when you're dealing with Prophet River, and for more information, just search down in the show notes. Joel's contact, smp@prophetriver.com, is there. Of course, Prophet River is the major retailer of firearms, optics, and accessories serving all of Canada. Windsor Plywood, builders of the podcast studio table. When it comes to wood, they are slowly racking up some things in the new studio as well. Whether we're talking mantles, decks, windows, doors, sheds, studio table. Yeah, wood I'm talking. Stop in to Carly Clausen and the team over Windsor Plywood here in Lloydminster. Tell them I sent you. Cornerstone Forum, Cornerstone, say it right, Shaun. Forum happening in Calgary, May 10th. What are you waiting for? What are you waiting for? I don't know. I hope you're coming, and we want to see you there. Tickets down in the show notes. Once again, everything's down in the show notes. Scroll on down, folks, and get your tickets. Find out more information about guns, gold, banks. It's all there. Scroll down. And we hope to see you at the Cornerstone Forum May 10th. New studio is happening here in 2025. We're looking for skills, labor, materials, money. We got a value for value wall. It's called the Legacy Wall. It's going to be going in the studio. We want you to be on that. So if that's something that tickles your fancy, just reach on out. Shoot me a text. If you're listening or watching on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, Rumble, make sure to subscribe and leave a review. You watching on X, make sure to give it a retweet. That's all I got for you. Let's get on to that tale of the tape. She has worked as a nationally syndicated columnist for the Toronto Sun, founded and serves as the editor-in-chief of True North, and founded recently Juno News alongside Keean Bexte. I'm talking about Candice Malcolm, so buckle up. Here we go. Welcome to the Shaun Newman podcast. Today I'm joined by Candice Malcolm. Ma'am, thanks for hopping on this end.
You know, it's a pleasure to be here, Shaun. I had so much fun when you joined my podcast a few weeks ago, so have to return the favor.
Well, the thing is if people don't realize, I was on your show about a week ago, and they can go check that out. And, it's funny, on this end, I'm always searching for great Canadian content creators, people covering the news, etc. I really try and focus on Canadians because, honestly, if we're going to get out of some of the predicaments we're in, although the United States can comment on it as much as they want, it's Canadians that have to take the bull by the horns, so to speak, and try and steer this ship out of the way of the iceberg. Unless we've already hit the iceberg, then we got to find ways to kind of, get out of the predicaments we're in, regardless. Going on your show was super cool. And I was just like, well, here's another one. Let's just bring Candice on and we can talk a little bit of your background and get to know you a bit better. So that all being said, I would love if you tell us a bit about yourself and what makes you you.
Sure. Yeah. Well, first I'll just talk about the podcast bit because I feel that way too. Like I am a big consumer of American news and I love so many things that I see going on there. Like I was so happy that Tucker Carlson went independent and started doing his own show. I felt like we got so much more of Tucker and we know him so much better than the old format. And I used to watch his old show on Fox News. It was probably the only show I watched over there. I love Megyn Kelly and what she's doing with her podcast. And I'm a big fan of the guys over at the Daily Wire and those daily news podcasts. And I don't see a lot of that happening in Canada. Like we complain a lot about the big traditional legacy media news apparatuses. The CBC dominates like every single newsroom in the country, every press gallery in Canada, like every provincial press gallery in the feds. It's like 50 or 60% of the journalists there are CBC. So that's going to completely impact the attitude and the mindset of even the agenda of what's discussed, the questions that are asked, right? And then you have the newspaper bailouts. So in 2019, Justin Trudeau basically bribed the big newspapers with a media bailout. And if it wasn't for that, I don't know that those big companies like Toronto Star and Globe and Mail, well, maybe not Globe and Mail, but National Post, certainly Post Media, I don't know that those companies would survive. And so we have all of these journalists in Canada who are funded by the government, funded by Trudeau. And as a result, I mean, they like to say that they're fully independent and that they're not influenced by the money. But everybody's influenced by money, right? At the end of the day, the bottom line is you have to have a profitable business. And if you don't exist. And the journalists know that. They know that with the Liberals in power, they'll get funding and their jobs will exist. If a Conservative comes to power, Pierre Poilievre said he's going to defund these, their job might not exist. And obviously that's going to have an impact in how you cover the news, the stories you choose, the way you choose to present them. So we have this problem in Canada. It's been there in plain sight for the last 6 years. And there is an independent media uprising. There's so many new independent companies that are out there. But one of the things that I found that I haven't seen a lot of, I mean, your podcast aside, there's not a lot of the sort of longer form political news conversations. I don't see like an equivalent of Ben Shapiro or Megyn Kelly in Canada. And so that's what we're trying to do now with the Candice Malcolm show and with other shows. Like in some ways, Shaun, I wish I didn't have to do it. I wish that I could do other things with my time, spend time with my kids and maybe focus on running the business. But the fact that there isn't anyone doing a political news and commentary show where you just like listen for an hour, you're completely up to date in the news, you know everything that's happened in the day, but you're also entertained, you hear an interesting conversation, interesting perspective. That is the niche that we're trying to fill in Canada right now. And I hope that, we'll build it. And I hope we can build more. I hope that we'll find and identify like 4 or 5 other talented hosts and produce more of those kind of shows. So that's what I want to do with the Candice Malcolm show and more broadly. So you asked the question of who am I? I don't know. I wear many hats.
If I may,
Yeah,
before
sure.
we get into the many hats you wear, when you wrestle with that question of why can the States do what they're doing and why haven't we done it in Canada, have you got to an answer? Like, have you been like, oh, I think this is part of the problem?
Well, look, obviously the United States is a much, much bigger country. And so they have a larger talent pool. And so, you have like the Charlie Kirks of the world that I think Charlie was sort of identified and brought into Turning Point when he was like 20 years old or something like that. Ben Shapiro has been a political commentator since he was a teenager. So obviously it's like a big country, small country problem. And then the other problem, Shaun, is that so many of the talented Canadian media personalities end up going to the States, right? So just anecdotally, like both Megyn Kelly and Tucker Carlson have Canadian producers, right? And like, I would love if those producers hadn't have gone to the United States and stayed in Canada and worked for a Canadian conservative outlet. But obviously, I don't begrudge them for going to the States. It seems to sort of happen in all industries that the best sometimes end up going down into the States, and we don't begrudge
So
them
then,
for that.
so is it money then? Like when you talk about the producers, they go down to these big shows. Is it the money?
No, I think it's just more exciting, right? Like back in the day, I worked at the Sun News Network, and it was a really exciting time in Canadian media. Like I basically, like, it was just so fun and so exciting. We had this sort of new news organization that wasn't biased, that wasn't left wing, that wasn't Laurentian. It was very kind of pro Canada, pro freedom. And it's interesting because so many of the people that I work with back at the Sun News are still, people that I have on my show and interview, and people that work in and around this space. And I think at that time, actually, Ezra Levant had a show, and his producer was American, and she came up to work for Sun News Network. So I think that, when there's exciting things, exciting projects happen, you can recruit really good people. I think that what Tucker Carlson does is really exciting. So I think he has no problem recruiting great people. And that's what I'm trying to build in Canada is this sort of like, capitalize on the energy and the excitement that I see in the country. I think that we are at an inflection point. Like, we are at a fork in the road, and we are either going to go double down on failed policies, failed liberal policies, socialism, communism. We're going to march down that path towards this green utopia. We're never going to get there, but Canadians are going to choose that they want more of that. Or we're going to correct course and say, no, the last 9 years have been horrendous. Canada is on the verge of being a failed state, in my estimation, and we need fundamental change. And I think that Pierre Poilievre is hitting on a lot of the correct marks. I wish we would go like 10 times further, though, because I think that what Canada needs is significant, drastic change. We need like a frank conversation about just how disastrous socialism policies have been in Canada, and we need to like completely turn our country around. And so, we're capitalizing on this moment, like, hey, this is an exciting time in Canadian politics. Justin Trudeau is gone. We're going to have a new prime minister. We're going to have an election. The next 6 to 8 to 10 months are going to be like a very exciting time in Canada. And that's why I think, if anything, it might be an easy time to recruit talent, because a lot of people are really paying attention. You kind of even see this, Shaun, on YouTube. Like, all of a sudden in the last like 6 months or so many independent content creators have popped up all over YouTube, creating really interesting, fun content around Canadian political news. So you have lots of like creative young people out there. I look at YouTube. I don't spend a lot of time on TikTok. I imagine they're there on TikTok as well. But I think that because it's an interesting moment in Canadian politics, a lot of people, not just in Canada, but around the world, are paying attention and watching Canada. It is possibility, a potential time for growth.
Yeah, well, one of the things I do on this side, right, is I take you look at the long form as the Ben Shapiro, and forgive me, you said one other
Megyn
Megyn.
Kelly.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
I was about to say Candice Malcolm. I'm like, wait, that doesn't make sense. I look at it and I'm like, I take my kind of ideas from Joe Rogan, right? I want to try and promote the Candice Malcolm, the others that are doing your type of work, because I'm like, I'll never be the person sitting in Parliament Gallery. I could be wrong. I could be really wrong, but I get to run into the difference, like the Tom Korski, and have him on and promote what his work is. And I try and do that as much as I can on this end. And so I'm to run into you and get the opportunity to talk in a long form chat about it is more about who you are, what you're doing, what people can go to you and find, because that's what I want to try and help do is promote the network that I continue to find myself in.
Yeah, and I think there's room for all of it. Like, I think one of the great things about what Joe Rogan does is he doesn't exclusively talk about politics, right? So
Yeah.
there's kind of like a small group of people that are like total freaks like myself that just like wake up and want to find out what's happening in Ottawa on Parliament Hill. Like I live and breathe politics, and I have for a very long time. I totally get that like most people don't live that way and don't care. They're not news junkies. They're not political junkies like myself. And so for me, I operate in the political world, and those are the kind of people that I reach with my show. Whereas you're probably much more of a normal guy. And
Well, I
so
was a
your
hockey
audience,
player. I was literally a hockey player interviewing, when I first started this, it was the Don Cherry. I got Ron
nice,
McLean. I
nice.
got, Glenn Sather here in oil country, to come and talk about being the GM of the Edmonton Oilers and the coach of the Edmonton Oilers. And it was just all these fantastic stories. I was talking to, different guys when they were in the bubble in Edmonton playing for the Stanley Cup back in COVID. I
Mhm.
was just, and so when you hear the political nut, I'm like, oh yeah, but everybody gets it because they have their certain realm where they're that,
Mhm.
I go to the rink and I run into people talking about the Edmonton Oilers and they can break down their fourth line and their feeder system and on and on. I'm sure in your realm, it's the Toronto Maple Leafs or something of that. We don't talk.
I hate the Maple Leafs. That's something that my
Good,
husband and
good.
I don't
Because
see eye
you're
to eye
welcome
on.
here,
Yeah.
Candice. You're welcome on this show because we don't
Yeah,
talk
but
highly of the Maple Leafs.
if I tell you the team I like, you'll probably like hang up the call. So
Why? Who do you like?
I'm from Vancouver, so I'm a Canuck fan.
Oh, the
And
Canucks.
it became like really hard to be a Canuck fan. I think around 2011 when we lost to the Boston Bruins in the Stanley Cup Final, it was hard enough to lose in the final, and then to have your city like burn itself down. I don't understand. Like we had the Super Bowl, and for some reason the Eagles fans decide to burn down their own city. Like I don't know why they do that. Why do people riot? I was really deeply mortified when people in Vancouver were rioting, and that it made it definitely harder to be a Canuck fan after that. But at the end of the day, you don't really get to choose your team. Your team kind of chooses you, and that's a long suffering Canuck fan over here.
Long-suffering Canuck fan. Well, we made it to the Stanley Cup Finals again and lost in Game 7 again. So, yes, I can understand some of the pains. Going back to the journey, though, the journey's led me to, another, like one of the first ones, she's been on stage for me, and she's going to be, I guess, again here in May, folks, is another Sun News, I don't know,
Alumnus.
alumnus, thank you, was Chris Sims. I sat and I listened to
Yeah.
Chris Sims. I'm like, oh my goodness, she can break down. Who wants to stare at the things the Canadian Taxpayers Federation does? I don't. And yet there's people there that are just like phenomenal at doing it. And I think of Blacklocks with Tom. So I'm talking specifically about Chris Sims and Franco Terrazzano and a whole cast of other characters there. And then I fast forward to like Parliament, and I listen to Blacklocks. Like I have Tom Korski on usually once a month, and
Nice.
his brain is just insane. And so like it's because of people such as yourself and others. I'm like, I don't have to become that person. I get to have that person on. They get to distill what the heck's going on in Canada down to a person like me who has become, my oldest brother would say, I've become the political nerd. And I'm like, if I'm a political nerd, I'm the political nerd for the common person because I'm, I still want to watch the other game. I still want to go to the rink and not have to think about politics. I certainly don't want to wake up and read about things that absolutely irritate me, like Justin Trudeau and Singh and all these different morons. And yet they're the people that are leading our country.
No, but that's so good. Like being normal is so important, right? So I spent like so much of my time in my career, like being a journalist, you're kind of just like a very online person who sits and scrolls social media like nonstop. Like, yes, I work the phones and I talk to people and I follow leads and I do research and all that kind of stuff. But like so much of modern day journalism is just like sitting on X or like sitting on social media and consuming the media. And I think that it's like kind of poisonous for people. I think it's a very bad idea to spend all of your time online. And to me, because my job is journalism and my hobby is kind of journalism and politics, right? So it's all consuming. And like, fortunately, my husband's kind of a normal guy, but he also likes politics, and we actually met working in politics. So I have like so much of my life around this one kind of like very toxic thing. And honestly, like I have 4 kids, and like that was like the best thing I could have done, because having kids, like putting the phone away, putting the screens away, focusing on like the real world and what really matters. Like I've totally leaned into being a mom and like just like everything, right? Like my kids and I love to do like science experiments and crafts, or we'll do baking. We try to bake like almost everything we eat from scratch. In the summertime, we get like a veggie garden going and we grow our own food, and like all of these kind of activities that were probably really normal for moms like throughout history. And then, of course, like people our age just don't really do this stuff anymore. Like everything is so convenient. So you just like order your food and like give your kid an iPad. And like we talked about this on my show a little bit, like you kind of outsource parenting to other things around you because it's just so convenient and easy. And you kind of like lose touch of like how important it is to be shaping and bonding with these little people that you're raising. And so I think like for me, the best thing is just like at the end of my podcast or the end of work day, I make sure I'm done by the time the kids are home from school, or like when the little ones are up from their naps, and I just like engage with them fully. And like they've kind of become like my life and my hobby. So it's good. It's good. Like I'm glad you have hockey. I like playing tennis, but I can't say that I'm like very competitive. It's just kind of like I play once a week for fun. But just like having other things that are outside this like digital world, I think are like it's like so important.
Well, I got 3 young kids, and I coach them hockey, and that's kind of at times, it's like, you can stress about trying to herd cats when you have a team of 5 and 6-year-olds on the ice, and you're like, what am I doing? What is going on? But it's healthy. And, like I have, I'm a similar mindset. I know when we first talked, I don't know if we hit it off around kids, but certainly you having young kids and myself having young kids, I can't think of anything more important. And it brings me back to reality daily of what's truly important. And, like the world is so strange. And I guess I'm like, when you went to, you talked, I think at the start of this, about you've always been in that realm. You've always liked the fact that you were at Sun News, like tells me, okay, okay, all right. Like you've been in this realm for a long time of media, of staring at Canadian politicians, etc. How long have you been looking at the political realm here in Canada?
Yeah, I mean, so to be perfectly honest, I didn't grow up like in a political family. Like I was one of those people that was like part of like the Young Conservatives when I was like 14 or something. I know a lot of those people. My husband was one of those people, but for me, I was pretty apolitical in high school. I went to high school on Vancouver Island, and like I didn't pay attention at all. I probably couldn't have even told you who the prime minister was back in those days. Back in the good old days when no one cared who the prime minister was. I think it was Jean Chrétien. But yeah, and then probably just going to the University of Alberta. I ended up studying like economics and political science, and kind of got into politics then. Stephen Harper was prime minister, and I had the opportunity to go and like meet him and go on stage at an event. And that was pretty cool for like a young person to get to like meet the prime minister and stuff like that. And so I think I kind of like fell into like the world of politics at that point and became kind of obsessed with it. And obviously that was like a very interesting political time as well, because, you had the George Bush, like war in Iraq, and I was pretty opposed to war at that time. I still am. War is like a terrible, terrible thing, but that was like the big political issue of the time. And so I wouldn't have like even considered myself like a hardcore conservative back then, because I didn't like what the kind of like neocon agenda that was being put forth. But yeah, so university, I graduated from the University of Alberta in 2007. I ended up working at the Fraser Institute, decided to go to grad school. Was really fortunate, got to travel a whole bunch. I got to basically see the world, and then came back and got an internship in Washington, DC. So I worked down in the US for a year in Washington. And then I ended up coming back home, working actually for Danielle Smith in Alberta back when she was the leader of the Wild Rose Party in that iteration of her political life. And then I ended up working in the Stephen Harper government for Jason Kenney. I was his press secretary in the Ministry of Immigration. And then I didn't like working in government at all, so I left, and that's when I landed at Sun News. So I would say that I've probably been in this arena watching and commenting on politics, either kind of from the journalism side or the political partisan side for like the better part of, I guess, 15, 16 years.
Over 15, 16 years.
Yes.
What have you, I don't know. What is it? Because like, I don't know how to ask it properly, but I look at it and I go like, I've been paying attention to politics. I didn't know who Danielle Smith was until, what was that, folks? 2021. I had her on when it was a pandemic of the unvaccinated. Two people from your past, Jason Kenney telling us it's a pandemic of the unvaccinated. And then Danielle Smith, who's been removed from her job at Chorus Radio, is on the show. and we're watching it, and then she comes on and talks about it. So I didn't know who Danielle Smith was until probably the middle stages of 2021. And then I got sent some of her stuff. I'm like, oh, this lady is sharp.
Yeah.
And you could tell I'm in Alberta, and I got family that were a part of the Wild Rose at one part. I got no cares about politics. I think it's just, and I still think this at times, man, it is just such a decrepit world, politics. So the reason, well, no, I'm going to come back to it. The question is, over your decade plus, almost 2 decades of being in and around the realm of politics, what have you learned?
Well, I try not to get like too cynical, because I think a lot of people, I would say that when I came into politics, it was because I was super idealistic and optimistic, and I thought Danielle Smith was like the absolute coolest person in the world, a libertarian politician who was like very knowledgeable about policy and cared a lot about like property rights, and like the things that kind of interested me and excited me about politics. Obviously back then were a little different than now, but I think a lot of people get really jaded, really cynical around politics. They kind of like, oh, I've seen all before. These people are all frauds and they're all phonies, and they'll change their position, they lie, and all that kind of stuff. And I think that is true for a lot of people. I wouldn't say all of them, but I still think that the world of ideas is part of what's driving the political conversation, and it's always like a good opportunity to think about what can we do better, how can we make Canada a better place. Like I've always kind of looked at it, as a journalist, like asking those questions, like pointing those things out, and I think that's like the only way that we can help have a healthier, like more successful society. I really think that Canada could be the greatest country in the world. Like I don't just like say that. I don't think it's just like a political rhetorical thing that you say. Like I think that Canada just has like so much potential, and it's such a wonderful place. At least it was, and it can be, and that it's kind of like incumbent upon us to make it better. Looking around, seeing like just some of the things that happen in recent years. Just to give you an example, like in Toronto, like carjackings have become a thing, right? Where like you're stopping at an intersection and like masked gunmen come and like force you out of your vehicle and steal your car. And this happens like with some frequency in Toronto, right? Like women with kids in their car getting carjacked in Toronto, Canada. Like I can't even wrap my head around the fact that that's happening. Like growing up thinking that Canada was this like really safe, really clean country. And if we were ever like to compare ourselves to Americans, it would be like, we don't have as many guns. We don't have as many gun deaths. Our cities are safer. People don't always lock their doors. And like that kind of idea and image of like what it was like to be Canadian versus today, like it's so drastically different. It's so sad how our country has fallen apart. I think in large part because of our immigration policies, which and our criminal justice system. Both of those two things just lead to this like rampant crime. There's another big problem in Toronto, which is home invasions, right? I honestly, Shaun, I can't imagine anything more terrifying than masked gunmen coming into your house in the middle of the night. Like your house is your sanctuary. It's where your children are. And the fact that this is happening, like honestly, almost every time like I'm out talking to people, I hear stories about this, whether I'm talking to like my in-laws or friends or work friends or people, like everybody's talking about this issue because it's happening and it's terrifying. The police in Etobicoke said to people, just leave your car keys at the front door so that when people break in the middle of the night, they can just take your car and go. Like telling Canadians, like just kind of get used to the fact that there's going to be like masked men robbing you. You can't have a gun to protect yourself. They have guns. We have failed to crack down on them. If we arrest them, they're probably just going to get let out on bail anyway. Like it's an absolute mess, right? So it's like, what are you going to do? What are you going to do about it? You can like move and go to another country. You can live in fear and like hope that the problem will go away, or you can like take an active stand and like talk about the issue and point it out and say, this is not right. This is not our country. Like, this is not okay. Something has to change. And I feel like I can't sit by and let this happen to our country. Like Canada's too good, and we have so much potential to be even better. Like we should be the richest country in the world. We should be the most like politically united country in the world. We should have more infrastructure. We should have a built out country. We should have a real like there's just so many things that we haven't been doing that we don't do. And the sort of ruling class in Canada is complacent with not doing, like, oh, I don't need pipelines because they're bad for the environment. Oh, let's move away from industry. Like everyone should have a job on their laptop. Like just this whole like concept of like what Canada is. I like reject it. I reject the Laurentian elite version of Canada, and I like the Canadian version that's like, we're optimistic about the future. We have so much potential. We have all of these resources, all of these minerals. We're a country full of like hardworking people who work hard and, you know, have a great community for our families. Like I want all of that. And I don't like the sort of narrative and the ideas that have been put forth by the Canadian media and the terrible liberal policies that have basically just like destroyed a country. I don't want to say it's destroyed. I know I said it was a failed state, but I don't think it's too late for Canada. I do think that like if we pick the wrong path in the future, it's possible that Canada will be a failed state and we won't have a country like 10 or 15 years from now. But I don't think that that's a sealed fate at this point.
Has anything that you're covering, because like, okay, one I go like, not only does the message to Toronto or other folks about leaving their keys send a message to just everyday folks, it also sends a loud and clear message to criminals that you can break into anybody's house and there's no repercussion. I'm married to an American, and we talk about castle law all the time. You know, like I've had on different people to talk about like, how can I protect myself in my house if people come running in? Well, you know, you got to do these steps because the first thing you're going to ask is, you know, were you how threatened are you? And you're like, they're in my house. My kids are in here. I'm pretty threatened. Like, you know, and so if you want to change the discussion on that, laws need to be changed. And so, well, that's a burn my saddle, so to speak, because like
I think it's unbelievable, Shaun. Like,
it terrifies me.
I mean, when you grew
Well, it
up
doesn't
in
even
Canada,
terrifies me. It angers me.
it angers. I mean, growing up in Canada, like, did you ever think that like carjackings would be a problem? Like when I hear carjackings, I think of like Johannesburg or like Rio de Janeiro. Like I don't think of it happening in like suburban Toronto or even like anywhere in Canada. And I just think it's such a sad state. And you know, it's not just the message it sends to criminals. This is the same with our immigration system, right? Like, what's the point of having an immigration system, this like legal, orderly system where you wait years and years to apply and come to Canada, when we also just have like a back door that's wide open and people can just like walk in from upstate New York into Quebec, and CBSA officers are there collecting luggage and putting them on buses and sending them in. Like what kind of message does that send to the world? Like Canada's a joke. We don't even have borders. We don't have immigration rules. Like it's
So my question to you then is, over the course of 15, 16 years, to me, what it looks like has been, you could say it's a steep decline. You could say it's a gradual decline. I don't care which way you say it. It's been a decline. Do you see anything that goes Canada, the one I think me and you believe it could be, if that's even possible? Because you need, I think, you know, in like you need the will of the people, I think. You need media willing to speak about certain key issues and not you getting censored. I mean, that's been one of the blessings out of COVID, I think, is there's been more and more media personalities starting to open up discussions. The ability of the internet, Elon Musk taking over Twitter. There's just been some things happening that are allowing more and more of the discussions to be found and heard. But then you're going to need politicians, like you're going to need a leader of a country to walk in, or a province, or several to walk in and be like, this is how it's going, and this is the direction we're going. But everything I see from Canadian politicians is they need the Canadian population to be on board with what they're saying. Not they're going to go fly in the face of what the CBC or others are saying. I don't know. Does any of that make sense? Like, does any of it give you hope of like,
I totally see what you're saying. I think that when you look at someone like Donald Trump, who was like a total outsider, he was totally brash. He was so insulting to the sort of sensibilities of the political class. And those were all selling features. Like that was why Americans put him up there and supported him back in 2016. And he was like a wrecking ball to the corrupt elite establishment. And he still is. And I think that a lot of people, you know, are excited and support him because he doesn't sound like a politician, because he speaks frankly and he says things that other politicians would just not say. We don't have that in Canada, right? Like we don't have a Trump-like figure. Even Pierre Poilievre, who does, I think, represent change in many ways, he's a creature of the political world. He's very cautious, very, you know, you could tell that he thinks things through very deeply. Everything he's saying has been rehearsed and practiced and possibly poll tested. I don't know. But he doesn't have that same kind of like renegade spirit that Donald Trump has. Like we're just going to defund all these things. Like for me, seeing what Donald Trump did on Inauguration Day was just like a breath of fresh air. Like 200 executive orders, which
so shouldn't that signal to Pierre Poilievre where what you literally have Carney, who could be the next prime minister. It's certainly
he will be. I mean,
right. Okay. He literally said we the Americans are going to have their war on woke, but we're going to be inclusive. And you're like, that is completely what I'm against right there. And like, where is the fire and brimstone from what I think is going to be the next prime minister of Canada, in Pierre Poilievre, just coming out full scorched earth, being like, this guy's insane. Because is the Canadian population, are we not all there? You're out in Ontario. So maybe I'm just speaking for the West going, we're see what Donald Trump's doing? Yeah, we can argue about some of the things he says, some of the things he done. But for the most part, we agree with a lot of what he's done and said since he got inaugurated.
Certainly on the culture war stuff, right? Like to me, that's what I'm like. I'm done with woke. I'm completely done pretending that men can become women, allowing boys to play in girls' sports. Like I'm done with that. I think that diversity, equity, inclusion is total nonsense. Environmental, social responsibility, like all the ESG, all of the green initiatives, the Green New Deal or the Green Reset in Canada. Like I feel like the United States just had a cultural referendum on all that stuff, and the good side won, right? The good side prevailed, and so Trump is sweeping through and getting rid of it all. I think that there would be room. Like I'm all for conservatives being a lot more aggressive on this stuff, talking about it a lot more, and making this a cultural referendum in Canada as well. But I think that obviously, it's different in Alberta than it is in Ontario. When you look at polls, it's kind of baffling to me to see that the Liberals still hold a lead.
Yes.
In polls in Ontario. So a majority of people in Ontario, or at least a plurality, still support the Liberals. They're happy that Trudeau is gone, but they're just as happy to continue to vote for that record, those policies, and that agenda, which to me is frightening. I think that really, what I think the concern is, Shaun, is that if Pierre Poilievre goes too hard right, he'll end up alienating the centrist, the more progressive conservative types in and around Toronto, and that may cost him the election.
But forgive me, because I'm just like, I need to understand this.
Mm-hmm.
If you're living in a city, do you automatically think men can become girls or boys can become girls? Do you automatically think that boys should be playing in girls' sports? Or is that not that far of a statement? Just come out and say, but he plays the political game. He waits, which irritates so many people. And maybe I'm a little bit too rash or brash, like I want it, but like I look at it and I go, yeah, there's certain things that cities versus people who live in the country versus, there's a whole bunch of spots in between there. There's different things you need to talk to. I get that. Different cultures, different beliefs, certainly. But like, I'm trying to find out why he has to play this poll game to keep the centrist out in Ontario. Like, is it just the way our country works in voting? That's why we can never have a Donald Trump? Because if Donald Trump walked in tomorrow, are we saying that he wouldn't get elected in Canada because he would ostracize too much of the people out east?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the United States is just a broader population. There's more conservative parts, and unfortunately, in Canada, like Canada would be like the United States if it didn't have the South or Texas, right? Like if the election was just being discussed or fought in the U.S. based on like New England, New York, Minnesota, Montana, Idaho, and Washington State, like
Donald Trump would never get elected.
Yeah, Trump would never win, right? But because there's all these other parts of the country that have different political climates, it makes it possible. Look, I think that Poilievre and the conservative brand is palatable to Canadians from coast to coast. Like, if it had been Trudeau, if you look at the polls, what they look like back in December, Poilievre would have won with like one of the biggest majorities in Canadian history, and Trudeau would have been wiped out, similar to what happened to Kim Campbell back in the 90s. I think Canadians are open to it, and certainly just given the economic reality of what's happening, cost of living and inflation, they do want to change. But I think, obviously Trump rubs a lot of people the wrong way. He's brash, he's rude, he's bombastic, and I think that there is like almost like a cultural conservatism in Canada where everyone's very polite and everybody is very risk averse. And, there's a lot of cultural traits
But that
there.
leads us to all the things we just talked about we don't want,
Yeah.
which is like, okay, all right. So we're risk averse, folks. We're risk averse. We don't want to do that. Okay, so we're going to allow transitioning. We're going to allow men playing women's sports. We're going to allow for the shutdown of our oil and gas industry. We're not going to do any pipelines. We're not going to do any of that because that goes against the environment. So we're going to put up, like, I get it. We're risk averse. I get it that we want to be polite. But at some point, in order to be polite, you just got to say no.
I
Like
agree.
this makes zero sense.
I think Canadians have come around to that. Like, I think that, well, first of all, when it comes to pipelines, I think that the environment and environmentalism being the top concern is a luxury belief, right? So when times are very good and everybody's very rich, you can start thinking about other things like, hey, we should probably take care of the environment to make sure that the world is safe for children, grandchildren. Of course, like, again, I grew up in BC. I spent a lot of time outside. I'm like, consider myself an outdoorsman or an outdoorswoman. Like, I love the environment. And to me, like, the thing that drives me most crazy is like people who litter or, dirty encampments all over cities, like that kind of thing. I care a lot more.
But it's a luxury
about
belief to
natural
worry about pronouns.
Yeah. Well, that's even more. So I think more Canadians now, the fact that the economy isn't doing that well, cost of living is really out of control. And we're talking about a potential trade war with our neighbors, and we don't have anyone else to sell oil to. Like, if we cut off the taps and cut off the access of oil to the Americans to stop selling to them, we don't actually have another customer because we don't have pipelines, because we haven't built refineries. Like, the infrastructure is so behind because of a decade of Trudeau. And before that, even when Harper was in office, he was met with a very fierce opposition in the environmental movement. I think that has all shifted, and Canadians are now that they get it. Like, we have to be pragmatic. We have to be realistic. Let's build the pipelines. I think that is a done deal, and that no matter what
You think
think
it's a done, when you say it's a done deal, do you think, like, because everything that I've been looking at in this country, I can't see a done deal. I can't see a way out of this because of the way the country's set up. I'm curious when you say, like, because I find that very interesting. Like, do you think we're going to have pipelines coming in then?
I do. Yeah. I think that whoever is in power kind of sees the writing on the wall. Like, look, if we don't have a future relationship with the United States, we don't have an alternative. Like, Germany wants our LNG, Germany wants our oil. We can't get it to them, right? We didn't build the Energy East pipeline to take the oil to the East Coast. Trans Mountain going west was blocked as well. So we don't have access. There's tanker bans off the coast of northern British Columbia. Like, we actually can't get our oil to the Japanese who want it, or the South Koreans who want it, or the Europeans who want it. So, like, that's a problem for both political parties. And I think that there's going to be a new consensus that's going to be pro pipeline in the future. That's the good thing. When it comes to the trans thing, because I do want to talk about that as well, I think that this is one of those wedge issues that backfired on the Liberals. Like, go back like 15, 20 years, and the Conservatives were opposed to gay marriage and the Liberals were for it. At the time, actually, everyone was opposed to gay marriage, including left-wing liberals and people, including Barack Obama. But then the tide shifted, and it became like a really popular and successful wedge issue for liberals to say the Conservatives are homophobic, they're anti-gay, they're hateful people, and they're scary. And a lot of people in Canada bought into that message and said, okay, I don't want to vote for the scary Conservatives because they're going to like roll back these rights and take us back to the 1950s or something. And so I think that the Liberals just kind of got caught up in that game of like, we can always just smear the right and call them bigots. And they've done that to some level of success. And so when the trans issue came around, it was just like the next iteration of that same trick that they've been playing for so long. And they didn't really realize that the overwhelming majority of the public doesn't actually agree with them on this issue. And it's not actually a good thing to tell a confused little child that they can change their biological sex by taking drugs and having surgery. So I think that Danielle Smith in Alberta showed incredible leadership with saying, like, you're not going to allow that for children, for minors. And it was a huge first step. Pierre Poilievre correctly, I agree, it took him a while to get there, but he eventually came out and said more or less the same thing, that he doesn't think that children should be taking cross-sex hormones. And now, of course, in the US, you see Trump reversing that, putting the executive order saying no more surgeries, no more cross-sex hormones. And it's like a wildly popular, like 80% of Americans support that. So I think that that's another winning issue for the right and for conservatives. They just have to be confident and just go out and say it, even though they risk, like, there's a very small, very loud interest group. Like I know this because I talk about this issue a lot on my show, and they come after me, they hate me, and they're mean. And sometimes it can be like very, when you have a mob of people coming at you, it can be scary. It can make you want to like switch your position. So I think that people just have to remain firm to their values. Like, no, this is not something that we should teach or promote as a society. It's not right. And I think that it can be a winning issue for conservatives.
Yeah, well, I agree. To me, the mob is loud and they're well funded. And I feel like, this gets talked about an awful lot, but the conservative group of people, this comes all the way back. Why isn't Canada have, the Daily Wire idea has been floated, right? Why is Jordan Peterson on the Daily Wire there and not created his own Daily Wire of the North? Right? Like people have asked, is Shaun Newman going to create a network? I'm like, Shaun Newman's trying to find different ways to make this work, right? Why isn't Jordan Peterson, with all his success, come north and created, I don't know, the Jordan Peterson Network? Everybody knows that name, right? I'm kind of curious, like why? I don't know the answer, Malcolm, Candice.
Well, I assume that Daily Wire pays him a lot of money.
Well, they would.
They pay him a ton of money. He has a very professional production outfit there. And honestly, I don't blame him. Like, I think that he probably has a really good lifestyle, like living down in, I think he's in Miami
Florida,
or Phoenix or something like that. Yeah. And, you get the nice weather. He's close to retirement. I think his kids live down there. Like, I never really understood why he was still living in downtown Toronto, because, like I've lived in Toronto. It's not that great. And, from the media perspective, I wish that he would stay, but he still communicates to a Canadian audience through his YouTube page. He just has like really high production value for going with the Daily Wire. And I again, like his college kind of like ran him out of town, and the whatever the professional designation body that governs his profession tried to take his license away. Like, I think he probably feels bullied by the Canadian government, and so I don't begrudge him for leaving.
I don't begrudge him for leaving. Just certainly, if you're gonna, like, if we're gonna create the climate for a politician to do all the things that Donald Trump's doing, if all those voices congregate in the United States, I think we can safely assume that the United States will continue to be what it is. If we want Canada to change our minds on ESG, DEI, all the 3-letter acronyms, and some of the crazy ideas that are out there, and it only takes Carney getting elected to all of a sudden pull back part of the Liberal Party, I'm like, oh man, we have a bigger issue than we think.
Now, I have a question for you, because I don't know that this is the case in Alberta, but I think it's certainly the case in BC and Ontario, where so many of like I don't want to say the best and the brightest, but so many people who are very creative or very entrepreneurial or very dedicated, like very motivated, they just don't stay in Canada. Like they end up going to the States. Like, okay, my brother graduated from University of Toronto Law School, and he said that about the top 25% of the class goes to New York, like every year, because they get paid more. My husband works in tech, and at one point we spent a few years down in the Silicon Valley. And basically when I was down there, I realized there's a huge network of Canadians. They have this club called the C100 Club. I talked to someone, apparently there's 100,000 Canadians who live in the Silicon Valley. So many of them work in tech, right? And so I was like, that's a huge number of people that if they were in Canada, they would be starting businesses and disrupting industries and creating jobs and just like changing the culture in an entrepreneurial, positive, successful way. But because they're ambitious, they want to be somewhere else. And I think that's like a sad reflection on Canadian society that goes deeper than just politics. Like, we need to create an environment where young students in school want to be entrepreneurs. So they don't want to go and be government bureaucrats. They want to go build things, and they want to challenge the status quo, and they want to disrupt industries, and they want to do it here at home. And I think it's kind of sad that and obviously it happens in television and music and sports. Like, all of the top Canadians end up being American. And I think that should give us some pause and stop and make us think, like, what are we doing wrong? How can we keep our best people in our country? And, if all the best ones go to the US anyway, I mean, that kind of like gets you down the spiral of like, maybe we would be better off being the 51st state. I don't think we do. But when you look at polls, it's usually the younger demographic that says that they don't think Canada is going to be around much longer and that they would be more inclined to go live in the United States. I think it's a lot to do with the economy and opportunities.
Well, if you're look at media, okay?
Mhm.
Where's the big money? The big money is in, I look at Viva Fry. Where's he's in the States? And you go like, there's better tax laws in the States. You can go to different states, find different ways to it's very business friendly, I want to say. I know that Alberta talks about being like super business friendly.
Mhm.
But like I have yet to hear of an oil field business go, wow, I am so happy to be in Alberta. It's just amazing. Like, I'm paying hardly anything in tax or just making it so easy to be here. You know how many times I've heard that? That many times. You know where you hear that about? Texas.
Yeah, Houston. Yeah.
Right. So you go, if we're going to do things that are going to keep these people here, we better start doing things that they actually want. Instead, we have, what has Canada become known for over the past 10 years? I'm not going to harp on all the leaders of before, but they certainly have led to where we're standing on. And there's enough here that you go, we got a bit of a monoparty happening between the Conservatives and Liberals. This is what we're kind of discussing back and forth.
Mhm.
But what are we known for right now? We're known for MAID. That's insane. I can't sit here and defend MAID.
No.
That's insane.
No.
We're giving out free drugs, that's
Yeah.
kind of weird.
It's
Now
not
with
weird. It's horrible. It's horrifying.
Right.
These are all terrible things. Yeah.
Right. COVID, you can fall on either side of the argument, folks, on whether it was good, bad, it happened, it didn't happen, the jab, on and on and on. At the end of the day, we went insane.
Mhm.
We just locked everything down. These are the things we're known for, not for being open for business, not for pushing the limits of how oil can be produced and done environment. Like we have the greatest standards. That's what I hear about Alberta, but we never get applauded for it. We get demonized, and on it goes. So you want Canada to become something that young people want to come back to, that want to stay a part of. We got to start doing things that attract them. And I would say, where I sit, I could be wrong on this, Candice. So, maybe I need to go somewhere else because they just have it as a value. I just want government out of my life. I want them to empower me to go start a business, not tax me to oblivion, so that I can do something, be successful at it. And then probably the next obvious step, I feel like, would be to give back to my community and to become involved in oh, wow, this is really good governorship. I want to ensure that the next generation doesn't get taxed into oblivion, doesn't have to pay for every social idea that comes out of every government. It's just like we have no leader out there right now talking about our healthcare system is good, but you are paying for it.
Mhm.
You are paying. We don't have free healthcare.
course
Words
not.
really matter. I'm on a bit of a rant here,
No,
but
I love it. I'm here for it. I don't think Canada has great healthcare. I think our healthcare is an
ours
absolute
sucks.
unmitigated disaster. And some people saw that during COVID, but there's still so many Canadians that are willing to say, well, at least we're not going bankrupt and at least we don't have to pay for it. And it's like, that's not a good excuse for having bad healthcare. Like, I have a family member who has been sitting in an emergency room waiting to see a doctor now for 4 days, and he had to sleep in a hallway in a bed. Like this is not good healthcare. We don't have it in Canada. Yes, when they diagnose and give you what's wrong, they're usually pretty fast, and we have very talented doctors and surgeons to work on acute issues, once they diagnose you. But while you're waiting to be diagnosed, or while you're waiting for any kind of routine procedure, it is absolutely atrocious. And even just the emergency rooms in Toronto, I wouldn't recommend stepping foot in an emergency room in Toronto, even if you were your life depended on it, because it's so awful. I agree. I think that even, I'm really optimistic and pleased that Danielle Smith is the premier of Alberta. And I think she's great. She's an outside the box thinker. She's an independent person. She's not part of the political establishment at all. And like, she thinks for herself. She's one of the very rare politicians that does that. But you're right, still, like, Alberta has improved around the margins. Like, it's not fundamentally suddenly more competitive with places.
Well, she didn't
like
hire Elon Musk, and he didn't walk in and cut the bureaucracy down.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
and I've got a lot of time for Danielle Smith. Everybody knows that, right? I watched her rise from the ashes, I would argue, from her walking the floor with the Wild Rose to being elected and going on shows like this and among others. But you're like, you walk in day one. And this is where I don't understand government enough. And I look at you and I go, you probably have all the answers on your side. Cause I just like, why can't we just axe a whole bunch of, I'm watching the States. I'm watching what Donald Trump and Elon Musk are doing with removing tons of the workforce of going like, listen, we'll give you 8 months pay. And then you can retire, not retire today, but you can have your severance today, 8 months pay. We'll walk on. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. It's going to cost a bit of money up front, but then they're out of a job at the end. Or you can stay on, and in 8 months' time, we're going to start axing and we're going to start finding position. And I'm like, that's interesting. Why can't we do that here? And
I love that. I hope we do it. I hope that Pierre Poilievre does it.
But I'm asking in your realm, because I look at you, you've been in this longer than I have. Does anything give you hope that all of a sudden this is going to be?
It's a sloth, right? It's a slow, perpetual, like, always hoping to win at the margins. I think you're right. Like, but the problem is like so fundamental in Canada that we are dependent upon our government. Like, the government has built itself up. Politicians have built up government because it's so easy to build up government. Like, you literally win elections by giving away money, promising more. Like, we're going to bring in dental care and we're going to bring in pharmaceutical care and we're going to build army bases. Like, every single politician wins elections by promising more stuff. But it's our money, right? So they're promising more stuff with our money. They're promising to take more. So much of the federal budget, like, we were looking at it for like a Canadian Doge, like, what would you cut, right? And when you look at just like all of the ministers, first of all, Trudeau has basically doubled the size of government in his time. And then on top of that, they pay consultants like ridiculous amounts of money to give them advice on what to do, basically just like patronage to Liberal Party insiders. But anyway, if you just boil down like all of government to just direct transfers, it's still like a huge percentage of the budget. I don't have the number in front of me, but we're talking about like billions and billions of dollars in just direct transfers that you can't get rid of, right? Old age security, government income, old age income supplement. You have the Canadian childcare benefit. Like, so much of the federal government, Shaun, is literally just mailing checks to Canadians, mailing checks. The federal government, not the provincial government. Provincial governments mail checks as well for welfare. They pay for education and for healthcare. But the federal government, like it's hard to cut it because you would actually be taking money away from grandma. Like, grandma relies on her checks from the government, her old age security to pay her rent or whatever. And you actually can't cut that. You can't cut that. And no politician would ever even talk about cutting it. And so as long as we have this huge loaded federal government.
Sorry, I'm cutting you. So
no, go ahead.
Aren't we doomed then to eventually have a cataclysmic event? And I don't mean like a meteor hitting. I just mean like, aren't we doomed to slide further into socialism or to break up as a country at some point? Because if you say you can't do it, because no politician will ever do that, because you're literally taking money out of grandma's checkbook.
Yeah,
it's like I hear you, and I'm in fairness, folks. I am not at the age where I'm in that realm, right? I'm in a completely different stage of life, so it's easy probably to say what I'm saying. But when I hear that you can't do that because no politician will ever do that, aren't we then destined to slide further into socialism and not further away from it, and not move further, I don't know, back up the slope or whatever you would?
Yeah, I mean, maybe it would require some kind of like a horrific catastrophe for us to actually realize that we can't continue on this path. Like, it is totally unsustainable. And I think there's like two things that are really interesting. If it weren't for Canadian oil, for Alberta oil, and if it weren't for the American military basically giving free protection to Canada, like, those two things subsidize Canada in the way that Trump says we subsidize Canada. But it's true. Like Canada would be probably like $100 billion a year poor if it weren't for that. And the whole house of cards would have like collapsed. Like, if Canada actually had to spend 3% of its military or of its GDP on military to protect our north from like invading Russians and invading Chinese, and we actually had to do stuff up there, that we didn't just like assume that the Americans would do it for us. And if we didn't have this like miracle product in the ground that is like the absolute backbone of the Canadian economy that we don't even like to talk about in central Canada. But the reality is that so much of our industry and so much of our economy is built around oil. Canada probably would have gone bankrupt in the 90s, right? And certainly would have gone bankrupt now under Trudeau. But it's like we have these forces and we kind of bite the hand that feeds us, right? Like, especially the Central Canadians, they don't like the Americans, they don't like the military, they don't like oil, they don't like Albertans. It's like, okay, hello, if it weren't for these two things, you guys would be completely bankrupt. Like you would be Venezuela. Maybe it'll take us getting to that point. I kind of think we're like hitting rock bottom in a way now in Canada, like the things that I was talking about with crime and just like kind of lawlessness that's happening and a breakdown of social trust, the social fabric. I have friends in Toronto that are like absolutely just mortified and horrified and deeply distressed by the Hamas protests that happened in Toronto, like all the time. It's just like another sign of the fact that our society is like falling apart and this doesn't feel like Canada anymore. I'm hopeful that there's like enough of this plus the sort of like cultural change that's happening in the United States around woke stuff and, you know, people now being openly pro-Trump. I'm still optimistic. I'll still say it. Like I think that there can be a turnaround. There can be a change. Maybe we'll never get our, you know, government spending down to the levels that I want, but I think that we could probably change in the right direction. We could probably introduce better alternatives for healthcare that aren't just, you know, a terrible socialist system. Maybe we can lower taxes to become more competitive in the United States. Like it will be incremental. But I certainly am still optimistic. I think like of all places in the world that you would rather be, like, I think you would still take Canada over like just about anywhere else.
I appreciate the optimism. I don't rag on all the things not to be. I'm an optimist. I appreciate it. When you look at the Liberal leadership race, is it gonna be Carney? Like, is there any hope deep down inside me that Ruby just comes from within and like all of a sudden Ruby's prime minister, sorry, for a day?
I was going to say, like, part of me is holding out hope that enough conservatives and other Canadians will just join, because anyone can join. It's free. You can join the Liberal Party. You can vote in their leadership race. You don't have to be a Liberal. So I'm hoping that enough like people online are willing to just like join and troll and select Ruby Dalla, who is quite the character. But no, I think it's a foregone conclusion. I think that Mark Carney has already been selected as prime minister. He will be prime minister. He'll be the next prime minister. I think the only question is whether or not he'll call an election right away and try to run a campaign on this idea that we have this impending threat of Donald Trump trying to annex our country, and that Pierre Poilievre won't do a good job negotiating, and that only a Liberal and only the experience that Mark Carney gives us from all of his years as a banker can save our country. Like they might do that. They might call the election right away, or they might do the other. There's a theory going around online that he would form another coalition with Jagmeet Singh, invite Jagmeet Singh in, bribe him basically to prop up the government, and then they would just blow past that set election date, October 2025, because it's not in the Constitution, and you only actually have to have an election every 5 years according to the Constitution. So we might be October 2026 before we have another election, and at that point, who knows what the country will look like, and maybe Canadians will be foolish enough to vote Liberal again. No, I don't necessarily agree with that theory, but that's definitely one of the theories that's floating around out there.
So if you were putting your money down today, Candice Malcolm is saying this is going to happen. Do you think we have an election here, April, May, October? Your three options are like April, May, so essentially like right away. The actual election date that I think up until I'd read the theory myself, October, or tinfoil hat, although it is possible, next year, September.
Yeah, if I had to put money on it, I would say we're going to go into an election this spring. I think that it will still happen. I think that actually, if anything, you know, there's been some recent polls showing the Liberals are gaining speed, that now that Trudeau's gone, Canadians see that as a more palatable option. I think that's actually good, because that will encourage the Liberals that they have a fighting chance and that they should probably call the election now, and that the longer they wait, potentially the worse it could get. So my money would be on a spring election, but I'm only like 51% sure. So it's not like a strong bet, but I think that the odds are we'll have a spring election. And if not, because the other thing is that there's a G7 conference that Canada is hosting this summer. And so there's a lot of people that think that Mark Carney will probably want to, you know, it's kind of a consolation prize, right? Like he's running to be prime minister, but he's probably going to lose. Like he's taking over a party that's just really viewed very negatively by the vast majority of Canadians. So, you know, why is he doing it? Like, why would Mark Carney, who has this like impeccable reputation, he's like a very wealthy banker, he runs a big firm, like why would he do it? Why would he step into the political realm? Like, what have they offered him? What's in it for him? I don't know if it's just like the prestige of being in this position or if he has some other plan, but I assume that there's a possibility he'll pull some kind of shenanigan and try to stay in power longer. But again, I'll stick with my. I've just talked myself out of it. Maybe now I'm going to say it's going to be a fall election. No, I'm going to stick with spring election, Shaun. I still think we're going to go.
It's like, why would he do that? And then you talk yourself all the way around to, he's the next dictator of Canada, folks.
For life. Like, he's been implanted by the world.
I should know this, and I don't. I'm absolutely spacing on it. When is the Liberal race done? Like when will we have the next leader of the Liberal Party and Prime Minister of Canada?
I think it's March. I think it's March 9th. It's going to be. Let me just. March 9th is when they are. 9th. And then, but then, like that's like Parliament won't go back that day, right? So that's when the leader.
Yeah, March 24th. Correct?
Yeah,
is Parliament.
Is when, because he has to pick his cabinet and he has to get sworn in and all that kind of stuff. So March will be like the coronation of the Liberals. Expect them to go up in the polls because people will see it and people will say, wow, he looks like a prime minister. Okay, we've got a new government now. We've got Trudeau out. We've got this new banker in. I think like he's going to go up in the polls and it's going to be neck and neck with Poilievre and the Conservatives.
You know how sad that is, what you just said? Like, I'm like, people can't be. What's the word? What is the word? I know a bunch of people are screaming at the radios now saying a bunch of choice words, but like, it can't be that simple. We just took out this guy who has ties to everybody running everything right now, but he's an outsider and he's going to come in and he's going to fix things because he's a banker. And he's so like, whatever. I don't even know the word. I want to vomit on this side. I'm just like, that can't be as easy as it is it?
Well, you said it. You didn't used to pay that close attention to politics. And so you would just kind of have like a vague impression of what's happening. And that's kind of what drives politics. It's frustrating for us that live in the weeds and we know every detail. And it's like, how could you not see that Justin Trudeau was just like a flamboyant drama teacher who didn't know what he was talking about and he was full of BS from day one? Like, we've been telling you that for 15 years because he's always been that way. And it took Canadians a very long time to see Trudeau for who he really was. And now it's like, to us, who is Mark Carney? He's a globalist. He runs WEF. He doesn't have our interests in mind. He cares about this global agenda. He's a central banker. He's a socialist. He cares about green, like making the economy green, the green reset. He's like one of the architects of it. It's not going to go well, Canadians, but Canadians are paying attention, right? They're raising their kids, and they're playing hockey, and they're living their lives. They're trying to make do and survive in this crazy time that we live in, and they're not paying close attention. So, I mean, that's part of the challenge. That's why I do what I do, because I'm trying to reach more Canadians and have these conversations. And do you
think we'll have a border czar? A fentanyl czar, I don't know, whatever they're going to call it. Like, are we going to have this before the deadline?
You'd think that they would just like throw someone up immediately, just like we.
But you're not hearing anything on your side that says this is coming like in the next day.
Oh, no, I think that the public safety minister, McGuinty, said that they were going to have one within 30 days. So I think that was like 5 days ago. So expect to have one in March, I guess.
Candice, thanks for doing this. I don't know if you helped me at all. You might have just depressed me for the day. I love the optimism. I certainly love what you're doing. I love everything that True North and there's lots of people there that I've been following along. I think a lot of Canadians have been, and I appreciate you coming on this side. I'm irritated with politicians because I want to find the biggest cattle prod I can find and give them a few zaps and be like, let's get this show moving, and yet, government's prorogued and you're like, there's nothing to even get moving because it's been used against. Frustration. Well, no,
but it's so good that you're doing this and that you're talking about it, because I think that political people are used to talking to each other and ourselves, and it's good to talk to other people that don't live and breathe politics, because you actually have a different perspective. You have different ideas. You're not afraid of the same like sacred cows that dominate the political sphere. So I encourage you to get more political, Shaun. I want you to use your voice and your platform and encourage the Conservatives to be more conservative and to stick up for Canadian values more.
Well, Candice doesn't know this, folks, but we've gotten awfully political, haven't we? I feel like it feels like I feel like I'm on a treadmill. Like I don't get any further ahead every week. I come back to this. I sit there and beat my head against the wall and be like, how can we do this? So we keep inviting on smarter people than me, henceforth Candice Malcolm being on the show. And we appreciate you hopping on this side. Hopefully it won't be the only time you do this. Maybe we can find a way to do a little bit of a roundtable with a bunch of former Sun News folks and really get the I don't know, political nerds talking and see what comes out of it.
I love it. I think that's a great idea. I'm here for it. And yeah, great to talk to you. Hopefully we can continue the conversation. I'll have to have you on my show again.
Awesome. Thanks, Candice, for doing this, and look forward to